Hello, Infiniteers! Today we are going to finish the logic for Gusteau's kitchen, which means we will finally be done with this toy box. It took 9 episodes, but hopefully it was worth it. I had told you in the trailer and in the first episode of this series that the classic toy boxes that we're going to recreate here were mostly easy to build, and it's true, they are. But it's funny to me that when I posted the polls to find out which toy boxes you were most excited about seeing, the majority of you picked the one that took the longest to build and had the most logic. Oh well, we're almost done with this, and so in our next episode we can finally move on to a new toy box. Most of the other toy boxes in this series should go quicker than this one. But it will be a few weeks before we do that, because after today I'm going to take a few weeks off to enjoy the remainder of our summer here in Michigan. It's finally cooling off a little bit, and we're not getting as much smoke from the wildfires in California, so I want to get outdoors and enjoy the weather before summer is over. I'll be back around mid-September to resume this series and the build for the Axiom in my Wall-E series. But don't worry, I do have 1 or 2 videos that I'm going to post between now and then to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Disney Infinity 3.0, so I'll still be around. But before I get too sidetracked, let's get back to the kitchen. Excuse me. And last time we did a lot of the prep work for the main mission, and we knocked out a couple of smaller missions to gather the rats that are going to be scattered around and deliver them to the collection pen, and to break the eggshells to clean up the workstations, which connected to the logic over here. And this was the logic for the rat gathering quest. And today we're going to tie everything together for the main mission, which is to cook the 3 main dishes, the ratatouille, the gourmet burger, and the dessert. And before we jump into this, I want to let you know that I have logic diagrams on my blog today for both this episode and the previous one. The diagrams cover everything, so you can see how it all fits together. And you'll find a link to the diagrams in the video description, and you may want to follow along on the diagrams as we go, because you might find that helpful. Okay, most of the logic for the main mission consists of turning radar markers on and off in the proper order to guide the player through the cooking process. And the process goes like this. After the player speaks with the mission giver, who's going to be over here at this locator, then they're going to turn on the burner for the first stove here and gather the ingredients for the first dish, which will be the ratatouille. After they go about gathering those ingredients, they'll come back to the stove and dump them in the pot. Okay? And then while that's cooking, they will start up the next burner over here at this stove for the burger, and then go collect the ingredients for that dish. And when they've got all of those, they'll come back here and drop those in this pan. And then, after they do that, they'll come back to the first stove, turn the burner off, because that's now done, and the ratatouille will show up over here at the plating station. Okay? And then while the burger is cooking over there, they'll come over to the third stove here, turn on this burner, and then go gather the cherries for the dessert, dump them in the pot over here when they've got all the cherries, and then while that's cooking, they'll come back over here, turn off this burner, which will cause the burger to appear at the plating station, and then they'll come over here and turn this burner off, which will cause the cupcake to appear at the plating station. So that's the flow. And it sounds like a lot, and it is, but again, most of it is just turning radar markers on and off to guide them to the ingredients they need and the triggers and switches they need to flip. Okay, and so we'll go through this step by step, And I know, like I said, it's a lot of logic, but it's very easy. And the diagrams on my blog, together with this video, should make it easy for you to follow along and hook it all up. It's just going to take a little time. Now, since last time, I have gone through and hooked up the internal logic for each of the ingredients. So as we come over to this one, for example, you can see it's connected to the level starter to turn this dynamic trigger off by default. Both the dynamic trigger and the radar marker are connected to the locator for this ingredient. And you'll see there's a couple of lines between each of these. And I showed you how to set that up at the end of the last episode. And I have done this for each of the ingredients that we're going to need for all of our cooking. That was your homework for last time. And that was mine too in preparation for this episode. So all of these have been set up like I told you at the end of the last video. Also, all of these have been, dynamic triggers have been connected to the level starter. I also connected all of the other eggshells for that little side mission to our logic and over here. So that's been done as well. A couple more things that we need to do in preparation for our episode is we need to set up all of the radar markers, and you're going to set these all up the same way. All right. So you're going to come to the radar marker, do a new logic connect or new locator connection, connect it to the locator, set the properties on the locator so that the beacon type is yellow arrow. Beacon location is the locator. Okay. You're going to do that for each of the radar markers. So for the ones for the burners, for the one for the pot lid, same for over here. And I've already done these ahead of time, as you can see, but they're configured the same way. They're hooked up to their corresponding locators. This one's connected to that one. This one's connected to that locator. This one's connected to that locator. Okay? And then when you've got them all hooked up, you'll move the locators on top of the thing that they're trying to point the player to. So the faucet one goes on that trigger. The ones for the burners go on top of the triggers for those radar markers. I put these off to the side initially just because it makes it easier to connect things to those locators. But once you have them, the locators connected, then you can move them over on top of the triggers and things where they need to go. Okay, so that takes care of all of the radar markers. Then you're going to come to each of the dynamic triggers for the pots, and you're going to do a new locator connection. Connect that up with the locator on top of the pot, and set the property on the dynamic trigger so that the target is the locator and the trigger distance is 4. Okay? Do that same thing with this dynamic trigger over here for that pot lid, which I've already hooked up ahead of time, and that one for that pot lid. Okay? And now we're ready to hook up the rest of the mission, all the other prep work with the replayers and camera and everything we did last time. And of course, all the individual ingredients. Okay, so as we get started, let's hook up the logic for the mission giver. So we already configured the wave for this and connected it to that locator. Again, he's the Jiminy Cricket's costume. That's who my mission giver is going to be. And the only property change we need to make from the defaults is to take the generation delay to 0. And under the generated friend options, we're going to change the behavior so that he stands still. Okay. And again, these are the same 4 standard controls for a mission giver. So we have our friendly wave generator, then we come to our radar marker, we do a new actor connection. Connect that up to our friendly wave generator as an actor. Under the properties, the beacon type will be a yellow exclamation point. Beacon location will be the connected actor. For the dynamic trigger, we'll do a new actor connection. Connect that up to the friendly wave generator. Under the properties, the target is the connected actor. Trigger distance is 4. And for the properties on the text displayer, I'll change the text duration to 4, text style to banner. Okay, so those are all ready to go. So once they have collected all of the rats, then we want to put the mission giver into the toy box. So on the friendly wave generator for the rats, let me get my notes here. All right, we're going to do a new logic connection on that. When the wave is defeated, we'll come over to our friendly wave generator over here for Jiminy Cricket and generate the wave. Okay? And we also want to turn on the radar marker, so when the rats are all defeated, we'll turn on the radar marker for our mission giver. Activate that. And we want to turn on the dynamic trigger at this point for that mission giver. So on our friendly wave generator for the rats, when that wave is defeated, come over to our friendly wave, or our dynamic trigger over here and turn that on. Okay. And Jiminy Cricket will appear here with the radar marker over his head. And when the player approaches him, that'll invoke this dynamic trigger, and that's what's going to drive the start of our mission to build all of the dishes and cook them. Okay, so on this dynamic trigger, there's a number of things we're going to need to do. First thing we will do is a new logic connection. When entered by player, any, we will deactivate the radar marker for our mission giver, because we don't need him anymore. And on that radar marker, a new logic connection. When that is deactivated, turn off the dynamic trigger for the mission giver, because we only want to do this behavior once. On the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection. When entered by player, any, we're going to display some text. We're going to have Jiminy Cricket say something. And what he's going to say is under the Start category. He's going to say, let's get started. All right, and then the next thing we want to do is turn on all of the radar markers to get the cooking started. So we want to turn on the radar marker for the burner, for the faucet, and for all of the ingredients that he needs for the ratatouille. Okay. Again, most of this is just turning radar markers on and off from this point. So on the dynamic trigger, when entered by player, any, we're going to come over to this radar marker and turn it on. That's the one for the burner, a switch that turns on the burner. On the dynamic trigger for the mission giver, when entered by player any, turn on the radar marker for the faucet. On the dynamic trigger for the mission giver, when entered by player any, we're going to turn on the radar markers for the ingredients. So we're going to come over to the second prep station over here. Turn on this radar marker for the herbs, and we got to turn on the dynamic trigger that goes along with that. So when entered by player any, come over here, turn on that dynamic trigger. New logic connection when entered by player any. After talking with the mission giver, next ingredient we need is over here. It's the tomatoes. So we'll activate those. And I don't know if these are the exact ingredients you need for ratatouille. I did look at a recipe, but we don't have all of the specific ingredients here. We don't have things we can use for certain ingredients. So this is an approximation, enough to give you the idea. Got some of the made ingredients and maybe a couple of substitutes. When entered by player any. Next thing we will need is the onion. So we'll activate that and the dynamic trigger that goes with that. As you can see, this is pretty simple stuff we're doing. We're just turning on and off radar markers and dynamic triggers. But this takes time. And there's a lot of creativitoys for it. Again, it's not difficult, it just takes time. Turn that on. Okay. And the next ingredient that we need is the mushrooms. When entered by player any, and I'm sure if any of you are real chefs and know ratatouille, you're probably watching the ingredients I'm turning on for this and shaking your heads going, why? Maybe some of these ingredients aren't quite right. But again, this is just a game. It doesn't have to be exact. The idea is just to feel like you're cooking something. And that was something I thought that D-Animator did pretty well in his toy box for Disney Infinity 1.0. Kind of gave you a feel for cooking, and that's what I wanted to maximize in my recreation, was to really take advantage of 3.0 and make it feel like you were really doing cooking. All right, next ingredient that we need is the olive oil, which is up here. New logic connection when entered by player any. And I could just tell you, go turn on the radar marker and the dynamic trigger and list the ingredients or show them where you are, but I know some of you are new toy box players, so I don't want to rush through this too much. I have to take some shortcuts in order to be able to get through all of this, but I don't want to shortcut too much, especially when it comes to the main quest. All right, and the last thing we need are these Felucia greens. Turn that on, and then one more, that dynamic trigger that goes with it. So I don't want to skip too much, especially with the logic for the quest itself, which is what we're doing right now. So some of the prep work that we did that's redundant we can do, but I want to make sure you know exactly what you got to do for the mission. Okay, so at this point, all of the radar markers for these items on these shelves are there. The radar marker is on for those herbs. for the burner, and for the faucet. Okay, now last time when I had you hook up the controls for the ingredients, when they approach each ingredient, that will turn off the radar marker for the ingredient, which will turn around and deactivate the dynamic trigger. Okay, so all the ingredients are already hooked up to do that. The burner and the faucet are not. So on the faucet, for example, on the trigger, we want to do a new logic connection. When this is stepped on by player any, we want to turn off this radar marker, deactivate it. And when the player steps on the switch to turn the burner off, we want to turn off that radar marker. So when they step on this, we want to turn that off. Okay? All right. Now, once they have done all of these, gathered all the ingredients, turned on the burner, turned on the faucet, then we want to guide them to the pot so they can dump it all in. And to do that, we're going to use this logic AND. This is going to tell us when they've done all of those tasks. Okay? So, on the radar marker here, when this is deactivated, we'll come up and input into our logic AND. Okay? I'm not triggering off the switch, the trigger. I'm triggering off of this, because before this quest begins, the player could come up here and just play around with these switches, and I don't want this to key that off. I only want to do this and input to this when it's part of the quest. And so that's why we're triggering off of the radar marker, so that when this is turned off, after it's been turned on, then we input into that logic AND. Same with this one. So a new logic connection, when this is deactivated, after it had been turned on, we're going to input into that. Now for each of the ingredients, we're going to key off of the dynamic trigger. Okay, so when they approach the ingredient and we turn off the radar marker, we will also input into the logic AND. So the dynamic trigger for the ingredient, when entered by player any, will come over to the logic AND over here for this first pot and input. And the same thing for each of these ingredients. When entered by player any, come over and input into the logic AND. This ensures that they have to go and gather all of these ingredients, and they can't jump ahead. And then the mushrooms. And this toy box is using, out of all of the classic toy boxes, this one is using a lot more logic than many of the others. And I know this might be a little bit overwhelming for some of you beginners, and I'm hoping it's not. I'm hoping between the logic diagrams and my step-by-step instructions in the video that you'll be able to follow along. But if you're struggling with this, it's all right. I would recommend going to my Toy Box Tutorials series, going through the first dozen episodes or so, and that will introduce you to the basics of the toy box. And that may help a lot to follow along with what I'm doing. Okay, so at this point we've got all of the dynamic triggers for all of the ingredients hooked up to our logic AND, as well as the two radar markers over there for the faucet and the burner. So once they have done all of those tasks, the logic AND will broadcast the complete signal. And at this point, we're going to turn on the radar marker and the dynamic trigger for the pot. So on the logic AND, new logic connection, when this is complete, we'll turn on the radar marker there. And we'll turn on this dynamic trigger here. Okay? And then we wait for them to come back to the pot. And when they do, they'll enter the area around that locator that's specified by the dynamic trigger. And so on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection, when entered by player any, we're going to do two things. We'll turn off the radar marker here. And when the radar marker is turned off or deactivated, we'll turn off this dynamic trigger. So we only want to do this once. And then on the dynamic trigger, again, when entered by player any, we're going to turn off the radar marker, or turn on the radar marker over here for this burner. So they can get started on the next dish while this one is cooking. Okay? And that's everything for the start of this. And then we just do some other things for the other dishes while this cooks. And then all we got to do is come back here and turn this off at the right time. Okay. Now, over here at this station, when they step on this burner, we want to turn off that radar marker. So when stepped on by player any, that turns the burner on, which we hooked up last time. But we also now want to turn off the radar marker. And when this radar marker is turned off, we're going to kick off the next part of the mission to collect the ingredients for the burger. And there's 3 of them. So on the radar marker here for this front switch, when this is deactivated, after it had been activated, we are going to turn on the radar marker here for the lettuce. We'll activate that, as well as the dynamic trigger that goes with that. So when this is deactivated, turn that on. We're also going to need the ground beef. So a new logic connection on the radar marker. When this is deactivated, we'll go gather the ground beef over here. So we'll turn that radar marker on and its dynamic trigger. Again, this just takes time. Hopefully you're seeing that it's pretty simple. Once you got all the individual things hooked up, it's just a matter of connecting them all. The last thing we'll need is some bit of cheese. So when this is deactivated, come over here to this ingredient for that funky looking cheese here. And turn the radar marker on for that. As well as the dynamic trigger for it. Okay, so just 3 ingredients for that one. And then they're going to go and collect those. And as they do, we have another similar setup to our first pot, where we've got a logic AND back here for that. Okay? So when we come over to each of the dynamic triggers for the 3 ingredients, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any, in addition to turning off the radar marker, which we've already done. We'll come over here to our logic AND for this pot and input. Same thing for the lettuce. Come over and input into our logic and. And the same thing for the cheese. It's not that one, that one. Okay. And then once they've gathered all three ingredients, we want to turn the radar marker on here for the pot. So they bring those ingredients back and dump them in. So on this logic and, a new logic connection. When this is complete, turn on the radar marker here for this pot and the dynamic trigger for it as well. And then we wait for the player to come over here. And when they do, they enter the area around that locator, which invokes this dynamic trigger. So a new logic connection on that when entered by player any. Turn off that radar marker. And when that radar marker is turned off, we'll turn off the dynamic trigger because we only want to do this once. And on the dynamic trigger for the pot, when entered by player any, let's see, the next thing we want to do while this is cooking is bring them back over here to this pot to turn it off. So we're going to activate that radar marker, which is over top of that switch. Okay? All right, and just trying to find my place on my diagram here. Okay, so on this switch, this trigger, when this is stepped on by player any, not only does this turn off the effects generator that we hooked up last time, but we're going to deactivate this radar marker. Okay? And when this is deactivated, we're going to do several things. First thing we're going to do is we want to put the Ratatouille out here and turn on this camera. We also need to get rid of this. And the best place to do that is back here when they dump the ingredients into this pot. So we'll do one more thing on this dynamic trigger. A new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over here and clear this radar, or this replayer. That will take these things out and empty that plate. Then they come over here, step on this to turn this burner off, and now we want to put the Ratatouille over there at that station. And to do that, we're going to do a few things off of this radar marker. So, when this is deactivated, first thing we're going to do is come and turn on our camera for the plating station, because we want them to see what's happening here. And again, that's set to 5 seconds. Next thing we're going to do on the radar marker here is a new logic connection. When this is deactivated, we're going to come over to the path that we connected our bowl to last time, and we're going to do a reset and play, and that will cause the bowl to hop up above onto the plate. All right, and then the next thing we want to do is we need to wait until that 5 seconds has passed. And so we're going to, when this radar marker is deactivated, we're going to invoke a time delayer. And we're going to set the time delayer to 6 seconds. Okay? And then after 6 seconds, the camera has gone off over there, and we can kick off the next part of the mission. So on here, we'll do a new logic connection when the delay is completed. Let's come over to our burner for the dessert over here and activate that radar marker. We should also celebrate now that the ratatouille is done and the first dish is made. So on the time delayer, a new logic connection when the delay is completed. We'll come over here to our action enforcer and have all the players celebrate. And on the time delayer, new logic connection when the delay is completed. We'll play our end of mission celebration sound. So on the sound effect generator, we'll play musical fanfare. And the last thing I want to do is generate the broccoli that's going to be over here on top of this stove. And since the enemy generation takes a little bit, it's probably a good idea to do it while the player is looking at that camera. So back on the radar marker over here, we'll do a new logic connection. When that is deactivated, we'll come over to our enemy wave generator over here and generate the wave. Okay, at that point the ratatouille is done and it's on the plating station and ready to be served. Okay, let me come over to my next diagram here. So on this trigger, when the player comes over here and turns on this pot, we'll do a new logic connection. When stepped on by player any, we'll turn off this radar marker. And when this radar marker is turned off and the burner is on, now we want them to go fetch the cherries. And so to do that, we'll do a new logic connection. When this is deactivated, we'll come over to our collectible tracker and do a reset. And that should turn on all of the cherries. Okay, I believe that will happen. And I will test this at some point and double check that, probably offline. But I believe that's what happens, is when you reset this, it'll turn on all the collectibles that this is taking care of, which we set this last time to the cherry collectible. So it'll turn all those on. If it doesn't do that, then all you got to do is come over here. When this is deactivated, just come up to each of the cherries and do a reset on the cherry. Okay? And again, I believe the collectible tracker does that. And again, we have a cherry there, we have one over here, one over there, one over on top of this pot. Okay, so the player goes and fetches all the cherries, and the collectible tracker will know when all the cherries are collected. So on the collectible tracker, we'll do a new logic connection. When the final collectible is collected, we want them to come back to the pot and dump them in. So we're going to do an input. Let's see, do we need this? We don't need this logic in. We'll just come over directly and activate that. And a new logic connection when the final collectible is collected. Turn on that dynamic trigger. We'll delete our logic and here because we don't need that. And then on the dynamic trigger for this pot, new logic connection when entered by player Annie. This is going to do the same thing we did for the other two pots. So we'll turn off this dynamic trigger, or this radar marker. And when the radar marker is deactivated, we'll turn around and turn off the dynamic trigger because we only want to do this once. On the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when entered by player any. While the cherries are cooking in the pot, the burger is done. So we want to come over here and turn on the radar marker for the off switch on this burner. Turn that on. Okay. And then, like we did for the off switch over there, on the first stove, when the player steps on this off switch, in addition to stopping the effects over here for this pot, we will turn off or deactivate the radar marker here. And at this point, we want to put the burger on the plating station. So when this radar marker is deactivated, we'll come over and activate our camera. A new logic connection when the radar marker is deactivated for the off switch. We'll come over to the replayer for the burger, do a playback, and of course we want to wait until to celebrate until the camera turns off. So again, on the radar marker here, when this is deactivated, we'll invoke a time delayer. And on the properties for this, we'll change the delay time to 6 seconds. Did I do that over on this one? I can't remember if I did or not. I did. Just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something there. Okay, and then on the time delayer here, new logic connection when the delay is completed. Once again, we'll come over to our action enforcer. Have all the players celebrate. We also want to play our end of mission sound. So on the time delayer here, new logic connection when the delay is completed. Come over to the sound effect generator, do musical fanfare. And again, we wait to do that until after the camera turned off, which is the purpose of the time delayer. And then on the time delayer, a new logic connection. When the delay is complete, we want to turn on the radar marker for the off switch on the dessert. We want to activate that to let them know the dessert's done. Now you need to go over there. Okay, and that takes care of the second dish. Now for the third dish, this is really easy because this is the last thing. So on this trigger, when this is stepped on by player any, we want to turn off this radar marker. And when this radar marker is turned off, we're going to turn on the target camera one last time. When this radar marker is turned off, we want to do a playback on the replayer for the cupcake. And once again, we want to wait to celebrate until that camera turns off. So we've got another time delayer set up here. We'll change the delay time on that to 6 seconds. So our radar marker here, when this is deactivated, in addition to playing the replayer back and starting that camera, it'll start the time delayer. And when the time delayer goes off, new logic connection when the delay is complete. Come over to our action enforcer. Have all the players celebrate. And then we're going to play our sound effect, but this time we're going to do something a little bit different because we're all completed. So on the time delayer, when the delay is completed, come over to the sound effect generator, and under musical, we will do the royal fanfare. Really give them a proper send-off. Okay. And I believe that is almost everything. One or two minor other things we want to do here is when the player gets up here, we want to generate these enemies, and that's triggered off of this trigger area. So we'll do new logic connection on that when entered by player any, and the player gets up here on the top shelf. We'll generate the wave, and on the wave generator, when the wave is generated, turn off this trigger area. So we only do that once. That'll give us some enemies up there to fight. Okay, and I believe that is everything. At this point, you will want to save your toy box and then go into the little hole there onto the start pad and walk out of that trigger area and play through the missions. Go collect the rats, go do the cooking exercises, and make sure you didn't miss any logic connections. When you test this out, if some radar markers fail to turn on or off, or some dynamic triggers fail to turn on and off, then you missed a logic connection here or there. And so if there are any issues that you run into while you're testing this, and it doesn't play through exactly like you saw in the playthrough video, then exit the toy box without saving it, reload the toy box, and then fix the errors. Save it again, and test it again. And repeat that for as many times as you need to until you can play through the whole mission all the way. And once you've verified that it all works, then exit the toy box one more time without saving, reload it, and then you can move all of the Creativitoys here and go into Spark mode, move all the Creativitoys below the floor to hide them, get them out of the way. And then add the ceiling blocks up there like I showed you at the end of episode 12, and then you'll be done. Well, that's it for Gusteau's Kitchen. Thank you for watching and for sticking with me through all 9 of these videos. This classic toy box was a large one to recreate, but it's a fun toy box, and I hope you'll enjoy recreating it and playing it for yourself. If you did recreate it, leave a comment and let me know what you think of it. And also, if you're enjoying this series, be sure to like and subscribe for more classic toy boxes like this. That's all for me today. I'll see you in a few weeks. Take care.